good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Tonight we turn our attention to Afghanistan, where a growing humanitarian crisis is unfolding. Mobile health teams and fixed clinics run by the Afghan Red Crescent Society are recording alarming cases of acute malnutrition, particularly among children. This comes as Afghan communities grapple with severe economic instability, climate-related disasters, and the lingering effects of decades of conflict. So to better understand this humanitarian crisis, we have on the show today Necephor Mghendi, who is the head of Delegation for Afghanistan for the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, better known as IFRC. Necephor, thank you for being on the show with me today. It's good to have you here. And I'm hoping we can start our conversation by maybe you providing maybe a situational overview of the current situation in Afghanistan and a little bit about the role of the IFRC in Afghanistan.
So thank you, Melisa, for having me in this. Yes, in Afghanistan, which is currently out of mind of many people, because if you compare Afghanistan today and Afghanistan 1 or 2 years ago, it's not in the international media as much. However, the situation in Afghanistan remains quite dire in the sense of humanitarian context. The issues that were reported very broadly in 2021 when you had in August when there was a change are very much remaining. So you have millions of people, more than 20 million people still in food insecure. And with that comes consequences such what you mentioned in the introduction, malnutrition among at least 3 million children. You have impacts of hazards, I call them natural hazards, which cause disasters, and that could be floods, or it could be earthquakes, and you have avalanches, and you have very, very severe winters at times. Again, in a context where people have come from a decades-long conflict, we call coping mechanisms are very weak, and Afghans have to cope in that. Now, add the layer of economic hardship, which has been brought partly by sanctions by the international community, but also because there's a lack of opportunities for jobs or for people engaging in productive economic activities such as farming. Again, you have a population which doesn't have enough to get day by day. And then the backdrop I mentioned also, before you've had the health system, which is relying on international financing, more than 75%. And that is something you have. And then you have the issues of climates, which are impacting Afghanistan. Afghanistan itself is not a major contributor to the climate crisis, but it's actually one of the most impacted countries. And by this, I mean, you look at that moment, they have issues to do with groundwater availability. So I live in Kabul. Last year, even where in our residences, we had to drill our tube well much more to go 180 meters deep because we didn't have water, and not just us, everyone in the neighborhood. You go across Afghanistan right now, whoever had borehole has to dig much deeper because, yes, groundwater is gone, on groundwater, but also groundwater is being depleted. And with water, lack of water, then you have an impact on potential waterborne diseases. You have a potential, you don't have economic activity going on. So it's quite a myriad of issues. And of course, there's a bigger factor is that the international community is not yet fully engaging with the authorities in a sense that they would in normal sense. And that limits the ability of support to Afghanistan. Okay,
so many things, like you're absolutely right, it's a myriad of issues. It's almost like a confluence of disasters that have, that have come at one time, prolonging this or exacerbating this humanitarian crisis. You took on this role, if I'm not mistaken, in March of 2021. Yes. So just before the transition of power. Yep. What was Kabul, what was Afghanistan like before, and how has it evolved to today?
Yeah, so in Kabul, where I stay mostly, before, in March 2021, there was the issue of insecurity. You had attacks regularly, and you could not move across the country as a foreigner, especially.
So violence, was it?
There was, because it was an active conflict at that time, and therefore you could not have, and that has the ability for people to move around is quite restricted, including organizations like ours. But that's the change is that since the change is that the authorities have actually in Kabul, you can move everywhere. You can move everywhere, and there's an improved security situation. That's number one. But the one which I say is the major one, you don't have a number of people dying. At that time, you'd have hundreds of deaths almost in a day. And now people don't die as often. Okay. And that's, I think, is a major shift in that sense. And then, of course, like with the, I call the breaking of front lines, people are going out to access services, and they're seeking services as they would in any countries, because there's no more conflict, and therefore people are out there who can go and seek whatever service that they may need.
So how, talk to me about the work that the Red Crescent Society in Afghanistan in Afghanistan. So it's the Afghan Red Crescent Society that's there. What is the role that you play, particularly within the healthcare system?
So the Afghan Red Crescent Society is the largest single local organization in Afghanistan, which is made by Afghans for Afghans, with a network of around branches in every 34. Afghanistan has 34 provinces, so they have a branch in 34 provinces. They have volunteers nationwide who come from the communities which are impacted. And they provide a range of services, including health. So they run health facilities, fixed facilities or clinics. They have mobile health teams which provide services
to
to provide services in remote rural communities. And they do have health camps which we've just supported them to establish over the past 2 years in areas closer to the border with some of the countries in view of increasing polio cases. And polio, sorry. It's one of the, Afghanistan is one of the very few countries in the world where you still have cases of wild polio virus. And that's one of the services that we support them to do. So it's immunization. But our role as IFRC, we support them. They are a member of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Society. We support them in mobilizing international assistance so that they can address the needs which are at the local level. That's main our role. We provide them also with the technical assistance, and of course, we also help them to highlight the issues, the humanitarian issues, so that they can garner international support.
Talk to me about the malnutrition crisis, because that is the red flag that we are raising today. How severe is this malnutrition crisis, the impact on the children in Afghanistan? And talk to me a little bit about the whether or not this is something new or it's been ongoing. Is this something that you've seen as a sudden rise, or has it been kind of a long-standing issue that has come to a head?
So malnutrition doesn't happen just overnight.
Oh, it doesn't happen overnight,
no,
yes.
it's a slow onset of, say, a slow onset crisis, which is driven by many other factors. And because the result is that children in this particular, and the entire households, but mostly those who are impacted as children under 5 years and pregnant and lactating mothers, are the ones who are lacking nutritious food. And many families, as I mentioned, when I went to Afghanistan in March 2021, the country was already facing one of the worst droughts. And the situation has not improved since then, not in a major way. And out of that, you have an impact on food availability and food security. It means people are not having 3 meals per day. Some of them are having 0 meals at all. And with that, then the impact would be, if you don't have nutritious food, access to nutritious food, then you have children, especially children under 5 years, and pregnant and lactating mothers, who then have these consequences which we are feeling now, which is acute malnutrition. So that can be severe acute malnutrition or moderate acute malnutrition. The consequences are big, but that's been taking years to arrive at this. You asked how severe it is. At the start of this year, the estimates were around 3.2 million children would have acute malnutrition. Now, that's a big number. In a country of around 50 million, that's a big number. Plus also pregnant and lactating mothers. The health teams that we are supporting in Afghanistan have recorded a dramatic increase. So in January, they were recording around 40,000. We screened around 40,000, just to compare. In January, we screened around 40,000 children. In in September, our team screened around 90,000 children. But when you look at the number that has increased cumulatively, we've had more than 45,000 children who have had to be put on either what we call ready-to-use therapeutic food, which is helping them to recover, or have to go into treatment.
Can you talk to me about that? Because children who are suffering acute malnutrition cannot just eat food and recover from malnutrition. They have to have a diet. Can malnutrition be reversed?
The good thing about malnutrition, the impact of malnutrition, so maybe the impact of malnutrition can be, so we have what we call wasting, and then we have stunting. Wasting is your weight is not as per your height and weight does not compare. It means you're severely underweight, and that's we find children who really are very thin for their age and for their height. But that can have an impact on their ability, on their immunity, which means then they're not able to withstand any other shocks. And if you have issues like I mentioned, lack of water, and they get waterborne disease like diarrhea, the chances of them dying is very high. Then you have what we call stunting, which is about the height. So you are of a certain age, but you're not of that height. Now, unfortunately for stunting, it's not easily reversible because you've not grown the way you'd be. But that has an impact on your future because it means you're not developing your organs correctly. It means you are not able to, even cognitive skills are not there as they should be. And of course, when you grow, even if you're able to go through treatment, you may not recover your height. And you may be an adult who cannot do adult duties, and that has an impact on your ability to earn a livelihood, for example. So, yes, wasting can be treated, and that's something with the treatment which is provided. Some of them are put in facilities, but also you provide for severe acute malnutrition and moderate acute malnutrition. You can provide what we call RUTF, yeah, and after observation, they can recover. That's the good thing. So. But it requires funding to do that. And there are myriad of your humanitarian workers, actors on the ground who can do this, but they just don't have the ability to reach the large numbers. As I mentioned, 3.2 million is not a small number.
So talk to me about the challenges in getting aid or getting humanitarian assistance to the people who need it. What are the challenges that you face? You mentioned just the sheer scale, the sheer number, maybe geography, I'm sure plays a part in the 34 provinces, quite spread out. But talk to me about the challenges that you face if the organization in making sure that whatever humanitarian assistance you have can reach those who really need it the most. So,
number one, more than 80% of Afghanistan, the population, is in need of humanitarian assistance.
80%?
In a way, I'm talking geographically here, because when you look at the country so vast, and many of the countries, apart from major cities, the rural areas which are relying on agriculture, which is no longer possible, or is constrained because of drought, then you have, the last estimate was around 24 million people relying, just to mention, on food insecurity, relying on food assistance alone. I mentioned also the 80% of people do not have access to economic activities because there are no jobs. Again, agriculture is one of the biggest, it is the biggest actually employee in Afghanistan. And because of that, you realize people need assistance to get through. But again, for organizations, humanitarian organizations require funding to deliver services everywhere. Just to give you an example, we cannot deliver humanitarian assistance in view of, in our own case, in the IFRC, we had an appeal of 120 million, which was funded only 42%. But what does that mean? It means whoever we projected at the beginning of the year that we are going to deliver health services, we are only able to deliver 40% of that. Whoever we projected is going to get maybe RUTF, they will not get. That's the impact of the funding in terms of what we can do as a humanitarian community. But also, the country itself is not getting support internationally. It's dropped off the media. I think it's in the media for other issues, not because of the humanitarian situation. And because of that, but also the international community is not engaging with the authorities as they would, and therefore they are not having access to funding that would help them to actually implement programs to help. So they are relying on humanitarian actors like us to address the day-to-day needs. And we're talking about access to health, for example. We have to take mobile health teams to remote villages. Then some have to wait maybe 2 weeks, another team to come to access that. You have widows. I think there are more than 2.5 million widows in Afghanistan because of the conflict. And they need assistance in order to bring up, to address it, and they don't have the jobs. And how do you make sure that they can get access? You have a country where they say 2 out of around 5 people are in a mental health crisis, and we're talking about because of the pressures which are there. So those combination of factors makes our work a little bit of, so we cannot deliver assistance, we can only deliver assistance to very few people. But, you know, humanitarian assistance is Band-Aid.
Yes.
And whatever we are doing is really, I mean, from 2021 until now, we cannot be doing, you cannot be giving people a food parcel, you cannot be giving people a blanket, or you give them a jerry can and you're helping them. I think you need to make sure that people can get to grow their own food, can have a job,
yes,
they can take care of themselves. So I'm saying, yes, there are humanitarian needs we are trying to address, but there's also the bigger need, I think many years on, is to help the people with durable solutions that can stand on their own feet.
Well, one of the things that I thought was quite interesting, you said so agriculture is the main the driver of the economy, but the climate crisis will impact, I mean, you talked about droughts and floods, and so how do we think about the fact that Afghanistan is being disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis, climate change, and there's really, you know, that is the basis of growing a more sustainable economy, so they can move out of being in a humanitarian crisis.
And that's correct, because they don't have, because of drought in particular, then it has an impact on food security, but it's not just that. There's no lack of surface water, as we call, and water is the main driver of everything. And you don't have surface water. It means nomadic communities, because you do have nomadic communities, can no longer go from one place to another looking for, because they don't have, as I've seen one area I visited in Kandahar in April, a nomadic community which then has had to settle down somewhere, and they've had to change their lifestyle because they no longer have the cattle to really rear, and that means they're there and they don't have a new way of, they need to change their way of livelihoods, for example. So yes, the climate crisis is driving on food security, but on production of food, but also jobs. You know, it's an employer. There are no jobs, and without jobs, then you have people who will move out of the country, going to other countries to seek, make money and support their dear ones. Again, just in May, you had flooding in Afghanistan covering around more than 30 provinces, and you had more than 400 people killed, vast fields which were already damaged, and that's the scale. We can see the frequency, the intensity of climate crisis is increasing. And then we have winter, which can be very severe. It's a country which, so last year, they had a cold wave which swept through some of the provinces, in the higher altitude provinces, again, killing livestock, thousands, and of course, making people much poorer, even those who had surviving livestock.
And we're coming up to the winter months, aren't we?
Absolutely. I mean, when I left Kabul 10 days ago when I was coming here briefly, already the temperatures had dropped significantly at night to around 9 degrees Celsius. And if it goes like that, it's going to be sub-zero. Now, what it means for winter, it's not just because they could cope, but it means a mother cannot afford to buy a warm cloth for the child. It means they cannot afford to have heating at home. It means that they have no access to water. Again, that's another layer. Now, if it's in a family, the child is already affected by malnutrition, then what does that mean for the child? And you see that child has three options only. I mean, that, unfortunately, it should not be like that, but it's either they get to wasting, as I mentioned, or they get to stunting, or they get sick, or they die. And those should not be the options that these children have.
That should not be the options that they have for their future. Necephor, how do we think about this? You mentioned the challenges of a lack of international funding, and I understand the geopolitics of it, the international isolation that Afghanistan seems to be, is insular from getting any kind of international funding. Talk to me about what that means, not just for the humanitarian side, but in addressing this more longer term. You said so succinctly, humanitarian is just a band-aid. How do we think about the need for development funds for Afghanistan so they can rebuild and recover?
Yeah, you know, to get development funding, which is normally coming from international financial institutions, you need to be recognized and getting that mechanism, which is normally directed towards the government. And then, but in Afghanistan, unfortunately, currently, that's not the case. And what that means, it means that Afghanistan, since 2021 until now, the only available funding, I might say only, or major available funding is only humanitarian, which is for Band-Aid. And we are not doing much collectively enough to address the durable solutions. And it means we can continue working with the mobile health teams, which are humanitarian, but you need to have clinics. Yes. So you really need to have people with hospitals. To build a hospital, you require access to development funding. That won't happen. I mentioned the issue of water, which is actually fast becoming depleted. To do that, you need to establish dams and have piping, and that's not going to happen. But, you know, the international community still has not found a way to work with the current authorities, and therefore they're still putting the funds in reserve. Some of the foreign reserves, they cannot access them. They cannot operate in the international system like any other country would, so they are finding solutions with some of the stakeholders, but that's not sufficient. Afghans cannot get the jobs as they would. Getting money into the country in itself is a challenge. So there's a financial sanctions. So it's just a big problem. And you can regenerate by having irrigation systems, by having people having access to healthcare, having people, and we're talking about not just humanitarian healthcare, and making people have jobs. They can then support themselves and they can grow. But that's not happening at the moment, unfortunately.
So much of your work is to address the current dire need, the humanitarian crisis. What message would you like to leave us with tonight about the gravity of this situation, Necephor, in terms of what the world needs to understand about this crisis? As you've pointed out, it's largely disappeared from the news media attention. There are other crises that we are also paying attention to, but for tonight, as we turn our attention to Afghanistan, what would you like to leave us with in terms of our sense of duty to our fellow global citizen?
No, Afghanistan should not be forgotten at all. In fact, forgetting Afghanistan will just mean that at some point everybody will be reminded about Afghanistan if we don't take action now. And I think yes, there are geopolitical issues and there are challenges with the authorities being recognized internationally and having access to development financing. But we have to engage with the authorities in one way, because it's only through engagement that you'll be able to address the issues, and the international community needs to engage and to find solutions. Yes, there are very many limitations with the authorities. Some of the policies are difficult for the international community to accept, but engagement can help to reverse those policies and maybe open a better way, a better sort of pathway for Afghans themselves to grow. And I think the issue of humanitarian financing is important. It is necessary, it's continuous, because that is helping, I would say, more than 24 million people still food insecure. So you really need to have that part of it. It's a combination. It's not one or the other. You need to continue the humanitarian work alongside doing the ones which is helping people to recover themselves. For me, I would just encourage the international community to continue supporting Afghanistan, and because what will happen if they don't get their own feet, they don't stand on their own feet, they will move to other countries to look for economic opportunities, and they will go to countries where opportunities are there, and that will create another migration, and that's so I think it's important for Afghans, and there are Afghans, everybody I've visited, every province I've visited, I've spoken with, they all want to rebuild their lives. They don't want to go to other countries. If they have the opportunities, they are just like you and me. They just want to rebuild in their own houses. They want to support their own families and grow within their own country.
Well, beautifully said. Necephor, thank you so much for coming here and sharing your experiences and your work, and for bringing this to our attention. Thank you for your time. That's all we have for you in this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.